the most common mistake is riding from front to back instead of back to front. You need to be following that horse moving forward and through, which takes so much strength. Yeah, it takes strength to hold them back, but that's that back to the bracing, the
Mm-hmm.
tightness. Then they're gonna hollow through their back. They're gonna avoid
Mm-hmm.
that connection.
Welcome to the Elevate Your Ride podcast, where rider performance is taken to the next level through conversation and education. Our episodes range from rider health to horse training to the stories behind successful amateurs and more. I'm your host, Ellie, personal trainer for equestrians. Thanks for tuning in. A quick testimonial from one of our listeners. Maddie said, 10 out of 10 recommend. There is a lot of great information from this podcast. I've started implementing this into my ride and have noticed major changes for the better. I read their posts and take a lot of their information into my rides. I'll listen to each podcast a few times and get something new out of it every time I listen. Thanks, Maddie, for listening. All right, today on the podcast, we are bringing on Dr. Arianna Aaron of Peak Performance International. Arianna is a chiropractor who specializes in techniques like chiropractic manipulation, dry needling, manual therapy, therapeutic exercise, cupping, and kinesiology tape to treat neuromusculoskeletal conditions in both equestrians and their equines. So we brought her on today to talk about how these techniques can help you as an equestrian athlete and your horse. Arianna, thank you for coming on the show. Can you first share a little bit about why you decided to go into this field in the first place?
Of course, thank you so much for having me. I always knew I wanted to work with horses, but trying to figure out a way that allowed me to enjoy the riding as much as working with horses. Before I became a doctor, I worked as a manager on a couple different horse farms, and I found that while it got me out at the farms, I wasn't enjoying riding my own horses. So the chiropractic care allowed me to bring, my love of physical exercise with the horses and just gives me more hands-on time with them, and it actually brought, like, a whole new training aspect to how I ride myself.
Yeah, I love that. And then is there a reason why you decided to go both the horse and the human route together?
To be honest, when I first went back to chiropractic school, I thought I was going to be 100% invested in the horse aspect, and then as I got into practice, I realized you can't really treat one without the other.
Yeah.
A lot of times, I see the rider and the horse have the same complaint. If I fix one, we're right back to square one the next session.
Okay, so it was more like field research that made you realize and decide like, okay, like I actually do need to be working with both to get the ultimate result that we're looking for.
Yeah, really just kind of trial and error, and I just really found I enjoyed treating the riders as much as I like treating the horses.
Yeah. Can you think back to like, was there a common theme or can you think of a specific example back in that time where like you fixed an issue and then because you did so, and you started off working with people, not with horses, correct?
Yes, and then I would say, though, as I transitioned into the horses more is when I really started to see it.
Right. So, what were the issues that you were seeing that made you realize, okay, I need to start working with the horses as well?
Oh, I think it was everybody kept saying, "My horse's SI joint is out again and again," and it would be the same. I just show up to a horse and we'd treat an issue, and I'd come back and we'd be treating the same issue. And it's a lot of times it was SI or ribs coming out, things like that. So looking at the broader picture of why isn't it getting fixed?
Yeah, so not just looking at the symptom, but looking at the cause and trying to treat more of the cause instead of the symptoms. What have the results that you've seen since you started treating the horse alongside with the rider?
So it's been huge, and it's actually almost allowed us to get to the root cause. So with that SI reoccurring issue that I've been seeing in horses, it comes from pelvic imbalance in the rider, whether it was the horse throwing off the rider, the rider throwing off the horse, working on them both. And then you can almost get deeper and fine tune. So once we're not worried about the large compensation patterns, you're really able to see how much making minor changes, like my riders are feeling way more they're getting more out of their horse in terms of movements. When they're asking, they're not having to ask with such large cues, and the horses aren't struggling to perform like lateral movements per se. Like, it's been really cool to be able to fine tune people's riding and their ability to realize how much their horses are actually trying. And sometimes we think they're just being naughty, but they just can't physically do something.
I feel like I am really sensitive to that because, as a fitness coach, I'm very in tune with my own body and how the changes that I make in my body impact myself, but also the horse that's underneath me. And that's something that I try to teach a lot of my clients is feeling what's going on in their own body because it teaches them to feel way more what's going on in their horse. And it also helps me have more grace for the horse. So, I have an old back injury that impacts me on a daily basis, and I am therefore fairly sensitive to horses who maybe have some sort of like a chronic pain or a chronic issue. Like, I know that for myself, for my chronic pain, I need to make sure that I'm properly warmed up. So I will do like some walking, I'll do some stretches. And then once I'm on the horse, again do the same thing, do some walking, do some stretching, do some long trotting, like really try to get the horse and I moving fluidly together. And I find that that is really helpful for not only myself, but for the horses as well. And I always have to cringe a little bit when I see somebody, especially when it's, as we're heading into winter time and it's really cold outside, people pulling their horses out of the stall, immediately hopping on and loping off from the mounting block. Like it just makes me cringe a little bit because I would never do that to one of my clients. Right. Like if it's cold outside and somebody came to me and said, okay, I'm here for my workout, like, I wouldn't immediately give them the dumbbells and say, "Here you go." It's always hard for me to watch that, and then we wonder why the horse doesn't feel very good, either mentally or physically after that. So, can you speak a little bit more on why warming up is so important for the horses specifically, but for the people as well?
So I think that's huge, and I think you touched on a great component because I think as humans we're much better. When I go to the gym, I always pop on the treadmill forward and backwards before I do anything. Like I know
Yep.
how to warm myself up. But what do riders do? They hop on. If we're lucky, they walk for a few minutes each direction, and then they're moving and asking for everything. And I think a component that I try and talk to a lot of my riders about for their horses is actually doing a few exercises before they even hop on their horse. Pelvic tilts before you hop on. I like to do a lot of single leg stance with the pelvis, so picking up a hind leg and shifting your weight into the horse to allow them to activate their glutes and stabilize themselves. All doing this before you put a saddle on their back and then the weight of a rider. So we're bringing that brain body connection before you're implying the demand.
Yeah, I totally agree. So there's a horse that I ride in the barn, and I find that if I get to the barn and I walk her a couple of laps, hand walk, like even
Yep.
sometimes in her blankets, and then I do a couple stretches and not static stretches where like the carrot stretch.
Mobilization.
Yes, mobilization to get her just moving. Like if there's a pole out in the arena, I'll walk her over the pole and I do a couple serpentines or I'll do some figure eights, like asking her to bend her body around and then I'll have her do like some hot turns, some forehand turns, some side passing, like just literally asking her to move her body. And that helps me be more in tune with how that horse is feeling on that specific day because horses have good days and bad days too, just like us. And if she is showing me on the ground that she's stiff in her left shoulder, well, then I know that before I even get on. And then maybe I'll be more conscious of how she's feeling on that left shoulder and maybe I'll hold a little bit more grace for her if we're, doing like square corners or if we're doing load transitions and she doesn't want to load that shoulder as well, right? So I think that that is really important as well, not only to warm your horse up, but to help you become more in tune with how your horse is feeling on that given day.
And that's huge. And just like you talked about, the in-hand work is something I think we all need to be incorporating more. I'm on the East Coast up north, so it's wintertime and the weather's not always great for riding, but that's actually the perfect opportunity, even under saddles, serpentines, figure eights, changing direction, changing the bend, hunches in, hunches out, just all at the wall. With it, a warm-up shouldn't just be 2 circles one way or 2 circles the other, time to go. It should be engaging all the muscle groups that we expect in the more advanced movements that we're gonna be asking for them, and understanding that just like us, sometimes they slept wrong. Something might be hurting, the cold weather might be affecting a joint a little bit more.
Yeah, not only that, but how often do we wake up with headaches? How often do horses have headaches? Like things like that too. So I think it's just important to be conscious of how your horse is feeling. And if they're not feeling great, then maybe don't ask for the world that day. I don't know. I guess that's just our two senses. So I know that you said serpentines, figure eights, that sort of stuff. Are there any other like specific stretches that you recommend for the horse before you get on?
Back to kind of those mobilizations that we talked about, I like to do both shoulder and hip mobilizations when I'm picking the feet. So it's so easy to incorporate into a routine. And that I'm really big on because I want things that people are actually going to do. So when you pick up the back hoof, just bring it out. We call it barrier stance. So just kind of slide your leg right under that horse's leg and just move it into 10 small circles each direction. If the horse pulls away, it means you probably did too much of a stretch. So you just have grace, let them put their foot down, let them regroup, but listen to your horse. And same thing with their front feet. Don't pull their leg all the way out in a full stretch, but bring it forward in just 10 circles each direction. And then you can do the same thing if you grab the hook capsule itself and rotate 10 circles each direction is such an easy thing to incorporate that would make the world of difference for your horse before you hop on.
You know, it's so funny that you mentioned doing like the hip circles and like the shoulder circles basically for the horse, because that's exactly what I do for my clients. So, if any of my clients are listening to this, which I hope that you are, think about how we're always doing arm circles before we pick
Yeah.
up dumbbells, and how a lot of times I actually have people do hip circles as well, where they're actually in a quadruped position. So, down on their hands and knees, and I'll have them pick up one knee just barely up off the ground and draw a circle with that hip, which is exactly what you just described that we're doing for the horse. And so I do that as an activation dynamic stretch
Yep.
before riding or before exercise or activity in general. So I would imagine that it's the same, that you want to be working on dynamic slash active stretches where you're moving the joint through a full range of motion, not static stretching a muscle into a lengthened position, correct?
Exactly. And I think we can kind of tie it back into the point you talked about earlier is the paying attention to how the horse feels. Because when you do it yourself, I can tell you if I got on the ground right now and started stretching, my left hip wouldn't be moving as good as my right. So this is just another way we can just be more in tune with our horses and say, oh, they yanked back that left hoof when I tried to do their hip circle and I had to back off of it. So let's really focus on strength and stability on that Clyde and help them out today.
Well, not only to mention that, but I think it's good to know what your horse's baseline is, because every horse is going to be a little bit different. So some horses might be generally tighter on one side than the other. Like, let's say they don't have as much forward range of motion as they have backward range of motion, right? So
Yep.
I think that's good to know, one, on a specific day if your horse is tighter in one area than other, but two, as a general rule of thumb, because then when you get vet work or chiropractic work or that sort of stuff, you are able to say to your vet, hey, this horse kind of always has this issue. You could say to your vet, okay, that's not normal for this horse to be this tight, or it is normal for that horse to be this tight. So I think that is really helpful as well.
It helps both you and the provider you have out get more out of a session, with vets, chiros, if you have a physio out or a massage therapist. Yeah, we can figure out most stuff on our own, but you're going to save me 20 minutes of feeling the whole body to jump right into where we have the issue, and then the horse gets more out of it for that day.
Are you ready to take your riding to the next level? Better performance starts with a mindset shift, how you think, train, and show up each day. Positive affirmations like small steps toward big goals, progress over perfection, and consistency builds confidence serve as powerful reminders to stay focused and committed. Check out our Elevate Your Ride affirmation merch, linked in the show notes, and add intention to your everyday routine. We have had Dr. Michelle Correa of Stable Body Physical Therapy on the podcast a couple of times now. I actually just released an episode recently with her. And so she specializes in physical therapy for horses and for humans. Can you describe the differences between physical therapy and chiropractic work for horses and riders, and when one therapy might be more recommended than the other?
Yes, so the cool thing is we actually have a ton of overlap, which most people don't know about. So, as chiropractors, we are trained technically, we call it therapeutic exercise. which is just the fun legal way of saying exercise. But it's our focus is, of course, the joints, joint mobility, releasing the muscles where they have tension. But that's not always the answer because a lot of times in asymmetry, you're going to have one muscle that's too weak and one muscle that's too tight. So, one, knowing what structure we're working on, where the problem lies. And the cool thing is, I think we work so well together because you might have me out, once a month. We're going to work through the soft tissues. We're going to adjust the joints. We're going to make sure everything's moving through full range of motion before you start up with the PT. Because usually with PT, you're doing it, a couple times a week versus with Chiro, it's a little bit more spread out. But if we're exercising, if your horse has a pelvic imbalance and we're trying to strengthen that with the imbalance, like we work really well. Have me in first and then follow up with the PT to really work on exercises to strengthen and stabilize and help hold that adjustment.
Yeah, because I'm sure that it probably is best if you move the body into the correct position that it's supposed to be in, but then you have to teach the body how to stay there. Otherwise, you just have to keep having readjustment after readjustment. And that's probably why some people say that they don't like their chiropractic work is making a difference either for the horse or the rider. It's like, okay, but what are you doing outside of the chiropractic work to make sure that you don't get back into that position?
That's exactly, we'll use the term that the adjustments didn't hold the way we want them to, but there's so much more to it. And me coming out once a month isn't the answer. It's what's being done in between.
Mhm. So, what are some of the common things that you are having people do in between the visits?
Of course, depends on what specific problem we're working on, but it's actually a lot of what we touched on. So I'm really big on making sure we're warming up correctly. Everything's being engaged before they get on, so we're not actually creating a compensation pattern by accident. We're talking about core work, work lateral movements, really just incorporating exercises, things such as single leg stands, pelvic tilts, thoracic lifts, chin tucks, which I think is a very underused component for the horses, extension movements. It's just exercises like we do on ourselves.
Can you dive deeper into the differences between a tight muscle and a weak muscle and why it's so important to correct those?
Yes, and I'm gonna give you an example, and I think we can all picture it a little bit better, and it's gonna be the same for horses and humans, but it's a patellar tracking issue. So we have our kneecap. A lot of time for those of us who have some wear and tear in our body, the knee does not tract in the groove correctly. So why? We have our vastus medialis, which is on the inside aspect of that knee. That tends to get weak. And then vastus lateralis, which tends to get tight. So we can type, how do you know the difference? The knee is the perfect example because what happens is the knee tends to get pulled to the outside. So one, we can feel the difference between weak and tight, but you can actually usually see it. So is your horse drifting off to one side? TMJ, jaw stuff, things like that. Are they head tilting to one side? Well, they tend to head tilt to the tight side and then they're away from the weak. So really thinking about that and then focusing on maybe we don't do our exercises equally. Maybe we don't go to the right as equal as we go to the left. And maybe we focus on strengthening that weak side and really doing stretchy work for the tight side.
Yeah, I think that using the knee analogy is fantastic. So, what I typically use, like if I'm trying to help a client through some corrective exercise, like if I see a tightness or in a weakness that they have, I like to use like a rubber band analogy. So, if I hold a rubber band and I stretch it between my fingers, and if I hold one side of the rubber band closer than the other, so instead of holding both ends equally, I'll pull one side tighter. And you can see that one side is taut and then the other side is loose, and I try to explain that that's what's happening around your joint. So then if we don't correct this imbalance, then that tight muscle is always pulling that joint towards it. And then that weak muscle is not strong enough to be able to realign it and keep that tight muscle from pulling it.
That's a great analogy. And I think once we understand it and then we think about it in our horses, things make so much more sense.
Yeah, yeah. I totally agree. Again, Michelle and I just talked about this. We had a youth kid in the barn. We were doing some strength assessments, and she was like, "I don't know, it just always hurts, but it's for, like, no reason." And Michelle and I looked at each other and we were like, "Okay, but there's always a reason, right?" So there's a reason why your horse is tighter and weaker. Like, there's a reason why that muscle imbalance happened. It didn't just come up out of the blue. It's either how the horse holds itself in its daily life or how the rider positions it maybe from their own weaknesses and issues on the horse. Like, there's a reason. They don't just pop up for no good reason at all.
I actually think it's huge that you're saying that because it doesn't just pop up out of the blue, and it's the same thing with
Yeah.
lameness. It doesn't usually
Mm.
just pop up. It's usually slow, but we miss the small signals, and our horses are so good to us, tolerate so much until they can't.
Yeah. Yeah, they do. They tolerate a lot, and then we wonder why they break.
Oh, well, shooting at us the whole time, they've been giving us all the red flags, and a lot of the times we don't always pick it up.
Yeah, so I can think back to when I was a much younger equestrian, so back in high school, and I was riding and leasing this one horse, and he stopped picking up one of his hind legs. And I would get mad at him and sack him, be like, "No, like you need to pick up your hoof so I can pick out your hoof." And he was never nasty about it. He was never mean about it, but it was just becoming an increasing issue. And then we started noticing lameness under saddle. Come to find out, he had a suspensory
Yeah.
tear in the opposite front leg. So he wasn't picking up that hind end because he didn't want to bear weight on that other front leg. And it's like he was trying to tell us, and I mean, I just didn't know any better. I didn't know. And so I really took that experience to heart, and I try to really, really pay attention to any time that I'm working with a horse. Are they doing a behavior that's outside of the norm for them related to their body? And if they are they just being kind of weird about it, like on that one off day, or is it becoming a chronic habit? And if it's becoming a chronic habit, then maybe it's time to, look into why it's coming or why it's there.
And I think that's huge. I think a really good example of this that I see a ton of in my field is saddle fit. And so I'm working on this horse, and this horse is happy as a clam. Such just a kind soul, no issues, really happy to get work done. And then the rider says, "Hey, since we're here, can we just check this out and see if this might be an issue?" And immediately the demeanor changes, the ears go back, the tail starts swishing, and then we're all kind of conditioned to go, "Oh, he's just like that." Well, he was at 2 seconds ago.
Right.
I can think back on my own history, especially when I was younger, on how many times horses were saying things, and I was just told, "Nope, that's just how it is or how we do things," and I
Yep.
really think we're starting to question and listen to them more.
So, when talking about saddle fit, so I live up in Oregon in the Northwest. Granted, I've never really done any research, but I don't know of any saddle fitters by me. So, how would I, in theory, go about trying to find a reputable saddle fitter that I can trust to come out? Like, are there certifications that they have? Like, how does somebody become a saddle fitter?
So that is unfortunately a very tricky question because there are certifications, and what I see a lot of in our area is saddle reps saying they are saddle fitters, and I have seen the training material that they are taught by a lot of the big name brands, and it's embarrassing how incorrect the anatomy is. And even on a lot of the certifications, the great thing I like nowadays about the internet is there's a ton of research available, so you can find the 10 basic points of saddle fitting. So at least if you have somebody out, you kind of can feel a little bit more confident to know, okay, are they truly well educated or did they just sell me a load? Because if you have an idea of what we're looking for and understanding the tree inside of it, like a lot of what I keep seeing with these foam saddles and a lot of certain brands, they only have one tree option and they'll tell you that they're just gonna lock the foam up to make up for it, and that's not how it works. So unfortunately, I do think that's an aspect that we need to educate ourselves on. And then asking around and talking to people, like I've found a good network of people who I refer to in this area for it once I see a saddle's an issue. But it's really having to educate yourself and then just kind of try a bunch of different ones until you find somebody who listens to you, listens to your horse, and at least knows more than you know with the basics.
How much do you believe in having like a saddle pad fitter as well?
I think it's important because what I will see a lot of is we're gonna have the saddle fitted, the saddle was fitted correctly, and then you're just gonna throw any pad in there, and that's not actually how it works because the thickness of that pad actually will impact it. So whether or not you need an separate fitter for it, but you do have to have that conversation with your fitter, "Hey, what pad needs to be under this?" Or if you wanna use, let's say, like a wool pad for the shock absorption that still allows for the heat to dissipate, what pad can I use for this saddle, or can we change the flocking on the saddle to accommodate this pad?
So, like for us Westerners, like the English world is so much more advanced in saddle fitting than the Western world is, especially for the all around. Like pretty much every barn either has just like a Harris or a blue ribbon, and that's just what like each barn kind of seems to choose which one works best for them, and then that's mainly what they use. You don't really see a whole lot of Western saddles fit for the horses. So a lot of times we'll have like custom pads to each horse. How much do you believe that that actually helps?
So a lot of your pads are wolf locked. So to be honest, I think we have a bigger issue in the English community with this.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, no, we've been seeing so much muscle atrophy or just no spinal clearance, the saddle's sitting on the withers. Like, I think that using the wool for the saddle pads is kind of saving you guys in that regard because we're using a lot of these high density foams, and I think that's creating a bigger issue.
Interesting. I would have thought that you would have been harping on the Western people for us to all having custom saddles for our horses. So
Well,
that is really interesting.
as much as the idea of a custom saddle sounds wonderful, I have horror stories of my clients spending an ungodly amount of money on a custom saddle to not have it, one, even be custom fit because the tree is just the stock tree, or to not have the custom saddles fit them at all.
Wow. And so then here's another question. Horses' anatomy changes over time. They change as they grow, they change as they build strength, they change as they lose strength, they change as they go through injury. How do you find that that impacts horses as well?
So I think that's almost where you guys have the advantage with your pads because you can change the thickness of your pad out really easily.
Right. Yeah.
So I always recommend using a wool flock saddle because that way you can have your saddle fitter out and we can change the flocking because guess what? They should be done every 6 months because my horse in the winter is not the same horse in the summertime.
Well, right. Yeah. Or it might be different in show season versus off season, right? Like your horse is probably going to be more fit, more lean in show season versus in the wintertime. So that is actually a great point as well.
And even maybe we have kind of like you talked about, even in the English world, maybe I have a thicker pad, half pad in the wintertime than I do in the summertime. Or sorry, opposite there when they're a little
Opposite. Yeah.
chunkier.
Right. That's actually a good point as well. So, why do you think that is? Why are the English people using the foam pads so much?
I think it's kind of a new fad, especially I'm seeing it a lot in the French brands, even the foam flocking.
Interesting.
And my concern with that too is the heat dissipation as well. I don't think it's looked into as much, and I don't think it's as easy. Like when you're getting wolf locked, they can do it right there. To change the foam, you have to ship it out.
What issues are you seeing with lack of heat dissipation?
Just really impacting the muscle development along the spine. A lot of atrophy going on or inflammation after they ride. What I've been seeing actually a lot of is some swelling along the spine after the saddle off, which is concerning.
Yeah, I would think so.
And it's really I've unfortunately see it get brushed off, but I think we need to be paying attention. I'm not saying that we need to use the sweat marks as a guide to how well saddle fits, because that can be questionable because did you work one direction more than the other?
Right.
But is there one certain spot that isn't sweating or is under the saddle? Like, just really be paying attention, feel your horse after you ride, and just look to see, is everything okay, and does everything look like it's circulating underneath of that saddle? Because we don't wanna be causing soft tissue structure damage, especially that's such a sensitive area along the spine. There's a ton going on there, and we do not wanna be causing an issue with the excess heat.
No, no, that is very, very true. Are you loving our content and are wondering how you can support your hosts? Subscribe to our podcast on Spotify for access to all our episodes ad free. For $4.99 a month, you can help us bring you the quality content you need to elevate your ride. If you're interested in sponsoring an episode for your business, our packages start at $50 an episode and offer you a wide range of exposure to equestrians. Click the Sponsor Us link in the show notes to learn more. To pivot a little bit, what are the most common issues that you are seeing in horses and riders? I know that you mainly work with the English disciplines. So, what are some of the trends that you see among horses and riders in general, and then discipline specific?
So I would say a lot of hind end weakness, a lot of incorrect engagement for the horse aspect of things. And I would say that's kind of valid across the board in all disciplines. My hunter jumpers, I'll start to see more stuff in the shoulders than I will, let's say, the polo ponies. But I see a lot of lack of hip stability, a lot of incorrect core engagement, and I actually think that ties in perfectly with riders because we hear the term core engagement, but I think that concept is lost and not everybody fully understands what that means. When I was taught how to engage my core as a kid, I was taught belly button to spine and to suck it in. And it's just that leads to more of a gripping, bracing, tightening of the abs. No,
Yeah. Yep.
yeah, we're not using our breath there. So it's not the deep stabilization system. So I don't think our horses are doing it. If we're not doing it, they definitely can't be.
Right. I feel like that was kind of more of a trend back in like the 90s and the 2000s was to just get like as stiff as humanly possible and then lift as much weight as you can, as stiff as you can. And while there's some truth to that, if you don't stiffen up your spine with your ab and your back muscles, then you're leaving your spine unprotected whether you're lifting heavy weights. But if you're creating strength out of tension, that to me is not a good path to go down. One, for just daily life, like, you don't wanna be creating muscular strength out of tension. Like, that is, to me, asking for injury, asking for a lot of post-workout soreness, asking for your body not to perform, not to be athletic. Like, you know how you look at some people and they are very strong, but then you ask them to do like a functional movement, like pick up a heavy dresser and move it, and they can't do it very well. Like, their strength is very strict, it's not athletic, it's not functional. Like, to me, I try to avoid building that at all costs, and to me, that is lifting heavier weight than maybe that you should, and doing it not focusing on your breathing pattern, not focusing on staying, like I said, just athletic through your body. Like, if I go to do a squat and I lift it heavier than I should, and I can't breathe through it, and I'm putting strain on my joints and I'm overtaxing my muscles, like that to me is creating strength out of tension. And I don't like that. And especially for riding, because if I teach somebody that the only way that they can be strong is to be tense, their horse is not going to be happy at all. So I always try to teach my clients, like, how can you be
Yes.
strong but light at the same time? Like, so if I'm having somebody do a squat, I'm going to have them match their breathing to the rhythm of the exercise. So either breathing in as they go down, out as they come up, or vice versa. Just match your breathing to the rhythm of the exercise. If I'm going to have them do a bicep curl, they're going to breathe in as they lift up. They're going to breathe out as they come down, and focusing on the diaphragmatic breathing. So breathing down through the belly, not high up in the chest, again, to avoid creating tension up in the upper body. And as I'm having them do their movements, I'm saying, okay, like, I want you to feel these muscles engaged, but I want you to feel loose through here. So for a squat, I'm going to make sure that they feel their hamstrings and their hip flexors and their abs pushing them back into the squat. I'm going to make sure that they feel the quads and the glutes pushing them out. But while they're doing that, I want them to stay light through their shoulders. I want them to feel even pressure through spread throughout their feet. I want them to feel like they can quickly move out of the squat position and not fall over. So I think that is super, super important, is to be dynamic and mobile in your movements. And that's kind of how we'll explain not building strength out of tension. So if I said to my client, if while you're doing this movement, if I chucked a ball at you and you couldn't quickly move out of the way, then you are too tense. And
Mhm.
we, as equestrians, we need to be able to move quickly out of a position. If you're carrying a heavy saddle over to your horse and you're about ready to throw it onto their back and they spook in the cross ties and try to run you over, you need to be able to get out of the way. Like,
Absolutely,
that is
and
really
I think
important.
kind of building off what you're talking about, what happens when you do lift too heavy of a weight? You compensate. And I think we forget that our
Yep.
horses do the same thing, and I think there's a lack of understanding in the riding aspect of what muscles are involved in specific movements. So, let's say I just drill lateral movements, and now I'm asking for collection, and I'm getting on my horse because 'cause they're not doing as much. I'm like, wait a second, did we already just work that muscle group? And then demanding more from that muscle that's going to fatigue out and actually create a compensation pattern.
Yeah, just being aware of what muscles are working when and making sure that we're working all the muscles and working them evenly. Same as with humans, you know? Like, I'm not going to give you a strength training program that's only working on specific muscles. It's going to work on all your muscles.
Right. If we did leg day yesterday, maybe we don't push it too hard with them the next day in that same movement. Like remembering that they get muscle soreness too, just like we do.
Mhm. So, with the main issues that you talked about, so lack of hind end engagement, lack of core engagement, what are some of the therapies or exercises that you're recommending for those issues? And how is that therapy or that exercise impacting the actual issue?
So, couple different things from the chiro aspect of it. We're going to start with pelvic balancing, adjusting where we need to, making sure back to what we talked about, everything is moving correctly. Then I like to really think about the rider, especially with the core study. I don't know if you're familiar with dynamic neuromuscular stabilization or DNS at all.
I have heard of it, but it's not something that I'm familiar with. I would love to hear you explain it.
So I guess there's a lot to it, but I'm going to try and really keep it in a way that we can incorporate it for ourselves. So one of the things I would love to touch on is the DNS 90-90 breathing technique. So this teaches diaphragmatic breathing, rib cage expansion, and proper core activation. A quick YouTube search of it so you can see would help. But it's DNS 90-90 breathing. And what you do, lie on your back, feet elevated onto a surface. So that's that 90-90. Hands on your belly and really just trying to practice your belly breathing. And you can kind of go through it a few times, but it's going to help you build an independent foundation and seat because you're turning on your deep stabilization muscles. So how can I ask my horse and understand what the feeling is of them lifting through their back and really engaging that core if I can't do it on myself?
So, something that is super common, which hope maybe you can explain it in a different way that I can. Can you explain why doing sit ups are not going to build deep core stabilizing muscles? Because, I'll have a new client come to me and they'll be like, oh, yeah, I work out all the time. And I'm like, all right, well, what are you doing for like your core workouts? And they're like, oh, I do sit ups and I can do 100 of them. And I'm like, oh, God.
So a couple of things to try and educate patients on. One is letting them put their hands on your abs when you do it and feel which part you're engaging. And it's usually the upper abdominal muscles, not lower. The other thing
Mhm.
why I absolutely hate sit ups is because out of all the exercises for core work, it actually increases intrathecal pressure in our spine more than anything. So if you've got a disc herniation or a disc bulge, that is the worst exercise you could possibly do. So not only that is the superficial core muscles, because you're not even breathing through it, but you're actually going to increase your risk of injury with it.
Mhm. Yeah, so everybody listening to this who hears me talk about how we don't do sit-ups, Dr. Ariana explained it better than I could. So, no more
There's
sit-ups.
more
They're
harm
not
than
doing
good.
anything for you. Nothing positive. So, what core exercises do you like to have people do to get down deep into the deep core muscles?
So step one is the breathing. If you cannot diaphragmatically breathe, we can't do a core exercise.
Very fair.
Then once we have that down, this seems so simple, but I promise you, as you try it, as you probably do know, it's way harder than you think. But I love to incorporate single leg balance exercises. So first, flat ground before we do anything, and please make sure that you're not gonna fall. Catch yourself if you do, I'm not responsible if you're here. But stand on one leg, engage your core correctly, practice that diaphragmatic breathing, really push out into that core, engage. And then we can do kettlebell in one hand and around the world with the kettlebell. Hip hikes, I absolutely love from that same position. So standing with your hips even, using your core, drop the hip and bring it back up. I think as riders in the saddle, that is key because we're constantly needing to move our hips and we are neurologically dead from our brain to our hips.
I could not agree more. I love using any sort of exercise that creates like pelvic control. So this is super, super common for like the Western riders and I think it's partially because when we're riding, we're typically riding with one hand instead of two hands like the English riders, and one that throws off our alignment, that throws off our balance. And so not that people should be using their reins for balance, but when you have both hands holding on both reins, you are going to be in a more balanced position than if you just have one arm forward holding reins with one hand, right? So I think that for that reason alone, we need more pelvic control. So that
Yep.
I call them the hip dips. That's the term that I use for that exercise specifically. And it just teaches you, like, let's say that you're riding and you feel that like your right hip is slipping down, well, then use that pelvic tilt or that hip dip exercise that we do all the time in exercise and raise it back up and recenter yourself. Like teaching my riders how to recenter themselves through their hips instead of through their upper body.
It's key, and I see it a lot in my polo players too. Like if you think about the mechanics of a swing, we need to turn that outside leg in, kick upper body, goes diagonal, and then you have to drop down. And how in the world can you do all those movements if you're not fully aware of where your body is in space? Like proprioception is
Mhm.
huge for all of us.
Yeah, 100%. And the more control that you can have over your body, the more set up for success that you're going to be in your riding in general. I don't know how people like when I watch a really strong rider versus more of a weak rider, the differences that I see is the really strong rider typically has a lot of proprioception. So they know where their body is in space. They know how much pressure they're putting on their horse. They know if one shoulder is collapsing. Like they can feel what's going on in their body. And they have awareness of what is going on in themselves and in the horse. They have the ability to pull themselves out of a position and put themselves in another position without losing their balance, without losing connection to their horse, without losing rhythm. Like those are the things that I watch for in a rider that I consider to be really strong versus a rider that's really weak. And I think that again, more control that you can create, the better it's going to be for your riding long term.
And kind of tying it back into exercises that riders can do, I think that every rider needs to either have a balance pad or a balance board at home because
Mhm.
well, doing the saddle isn't enough.
Yeah, 100% agree. My balance pad is right next to me down on the ground. It is probably my favorite tool to use with riders because for a couple of different reasons. One, it's an unstable surface, and
Yep.
the barn is an unstable surface. Like nobody wants to get an injured ankle from walking around in uneven dirt. So stand on an uneven surface in your workouts. It's going to make your body stronger, so that way you are less prone to injury, even just being at the barn in and of itself, but it's also going to teach you how to find balance in your own body on top of something that's unstable, like when you're riding a horse. A horse is not a stable surface. They move and do random things. So the more that I can train somebody to be stable on top of something that is unstable, again, the more control they're going to have, but the less likely that they are to get injured.
Well, it's exactly that. If you can't stand on a balance board, how in the world are we riding a horse?
Great question. I don't know.
If you can't stand on one leg in my office, there is no way I can think you're going to be able to sit that canter.
I could not agree more. And that's why, like, it's nice to have people send me videos of them riding, and sometimes I will ask for them. But I can just tell by looking at somebody on the ground what they're going to struggle with when they go to ride. It's the same things. You struggle with the same things on the ground that you struggle with in the saddle. It doesn't change.
It really isn't, and we can only be riding so much between weather, between 1, how much our horses can handle because I don't think they need to is okay, but we can't be riding them 6 days a week. I don't train that many days a week. I mean,
Right.
we've found having recovery periods is huge. So how am I still gonna build strength when I'm not there in a way that is going to directly impact my riding? That's really functional movement patterns, proprioceptive training. There's so much we can be doing to help our horses.
Are you always hearing roll your shoulders back, push your heels down, add more leg, but you don't feel like you can? These cues will feel like a constant fight if your mind and body has not developed the proper connection, coordination, mobility, stability, and strength required. At Lope Down the Rail Fitness, I create customized workout plans for riders so you can become a stronger athlete for your horse. If you're ready to ride more effectively, visit my website, lopeanddowntherailfitness.com, linked in the show notes of this episode, and start training with purpose to elevate your ride. Can you explain a little bit deeper into the different therapies that you offer and when one therapy is maybe more appropriate to use than the other?
Absolutely. So I'm a chiropractor, and the adjustments are kind of my bread and butter. I love that. That's my foundation. But a lot of times what I see, even the chiropractic field, what most people don't know, it's actually divided into philosophical chiropractors and evidence-based chiropractors. And the philosophy is the old school rat crack. If I adjust this, everything gets fixed. But evidence based is really looking at muscle development, soft tissue structure, how that all ties in, what's affecting the joints. And that's where these modalities come into play. So I love grass, and anybody who has been treated by me, their horses have been scraped or they've been scraped because, especially with the horses, they are such big animals. So it takes a little bit of strength to get in there and to get to the joint capsule to loosen everything up. So I love that aspect of any kind of instrument assisted soft tissue mobilization technique. We can really loosen up the joint fibers. The cool thing about that with like scar tissue fascial restrictions is it actually helps break up those fascial adhesions and lay it down into a correct pattern so we've got more tissue play.
I have a question. So
Yeah.
is that breaking down into like the muscle spindles and releasing the tension through the muscle spindle, or is it a different idea?
No, more of the collagen fibers themselves. So if you think about scar tissue, it's kind of a little hard. I usually like to use my hands, but picture a bunch of rope that's all knotted up. So normal tissue has nice layers of collagen that glide. Scar tissue heals in more of a knotted matrix. So the grass and the cupping, scraping, all of that stuff actually helps to release those fibers and help with tissue tensility.
Can you feel that? Like if you run your hand over a muscle that has scar tissue, can you feel those bumps and those ridges?
Yes, absolutely you can. I mean, we can feel it on ourselves. So if you have a scar on you, you can feel the scar itself, but it's actually really cool to feel if you try and move it, how it doesn't glide. And that's what we have to remember. We can feel it on our horses too. A lot of the times I actually had one recently where if you saw him move, you could see along his stifles, the tissue would actually wrinkle. So we can physically feel it. You can see it. You can feel it too. If I bend down and try and touch my toes and I haven't stretched in a while, you can feel hamstrings for me and for most riders. Knees are always bad.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, for sure. That was the reason why I asked is because I actually used to have this client who always complains that she felt like the back of her hamstrings were just bumpy and like they were just like knots in them. And I thought that that was kind of odd. I was like, what do you mean like they're bumpy? Like I don't understand that. So is the Graston tool the preferred method for that? Or like is any amount of stretching and foam rolling going to help with that? Or is it really important to really get in there with some sort of manual therapy tool?
So I think stretching and foam rolling is beneficial, but I really think that a manual tool cupping is good on humans. I find on the horses that it does not get quite as deep as I would like it to.
Okay.
Just personal preference. Other people might find different things, but I love the manual tools for getting in there, and the horses are so reactive to it, whereas I couldn't do the same on a human, whereas I think the cupping is great too.
Mhm.
But it's way more than what you think. Sometimes I see people working and it kind of blows my mind. I'm like, I don't think you're actually doing anything.
Yeah, I am somewhat familiar with the Graston tool. I have had it done in 2 places on me. So, in my lower back where I had my injury, I've had them scrape that. But then I also was getting really bad shin splints for a while, and they used the Graston tool, like, on my posterior tib, and, oh, I've never been in so much pain in my life, ever. It did help, but, oh my god, it's
It
so
def But think
painful.
about it, because how long did it take for that injury to happen? How painful was the process of that? Like, the Graston is great, I think, for more chronic injuries too, because a lot of the times we get these faulty healing patterns, and you gotta break up that tissue so we can create the new correct healing.
Oh, yeah, I mean, I'd been going out line dancing 2 or 3 times a week for, like, a year before it started bothering me, and then it was bothering me for about a month or 2 before like, really bothering me, like, to the point where, like, I couldn't walk very well, like, it was not good, and so I went and had the Graston tool done and started line dancing less, and now I don't have my shin splints anymore, so there you go. I do have somewhat of a question, though. So, just on the shin splint in general, do you find that shin splints can be a cause from weak glutes?
So, I think it's something to consider when I'm treating. So, let's say we've got shin splints, or I'm gonna put, like, plantar fasciitis in that same category. I
Mhm. Yeah.
always make sure we're looking higher up, because there's usually a component to it. So what caused it in the first place, it's hard to tell. But if, especially, I think you nailed it with weak glutes. So if we've got a weak glute, we've got a little bit of a hip drop, and how that's going to alter the gait pattern.
Mhm.
You know, heel strike, midfoot, and toe off all is going to alter if that hip is weak on that side. So it's going to cause you to compensate.
The reason why I was asking specifically is because so I show in the are you familiar with the event, the showmanship?
Yes.
Okay, so in the showmanship, we want a strong heel strike. We're looking for flat knee, toe up, like literally all of our body weight just going right into the heel. And as a personal trainer, I cringe when I myself do a showmanship run or when I have somebody else do a showmanship run. I'm like, oh my God, it's so bad for you. But it's what we do. So I recommend to my clients that they try to practice their actual showmanship run as little as possible, like, practice it only to the point where you feel confident in it, maybe even only when you're at the horse shows, and just try to run like normal when you're practicing showmanship, because I would also get shin splints from showmanship running, and then some of my clients were having the same issues too. And so I started to pick it apart and say, okay, like, how can we
Yep.
better support ourselves for the showmanship run? And I found that if I strengthen the glutes and strengthen the core to have better shock absorption and kind of suspend our body weight up a little bit better instead of letting all of our body weight just hit that heel as hard as possible. I noticed that it got better. So I just was curious, like, is that the placebo effect or is there any actual truth to that?
No, there is definitely a truth to that, and I think your advice was perfect, because that's a faulty movement pattern. I would
Yep.
never want to see somebody running or walking like that.
Well, and it's what we do.
Unfortunately, we're not gonna change that, but
No.
you can change how you prepare for it, and you nailed it with that, because if you keep practicing that way, you're gonna create more of an issue. But if we strengthen everything and then you just have to turn it on to perform, it's really going to help alleviate the stress.
Yeah, okay, I totally agree, and like I said, that's what I had seen, but I just was curious on your thoughts as well. So for anybody listening to this that does the showmanship, you need to strengthen your glutes, specifically like single leg glute exercises. So like single leg RDLs, single leg glute bridges, glute bridge marches, anything that strengthens one side at a time is going to be fantastic. And then any sort of like deep core stabilizing exercise, like all those single leg exercises that you were explaining earlier. I love a good old dead bug. That is one of my favorite deep core stabilizing exercises. Farmer carries, all the things.
And I love how you said for the glute activation to make sure they're one-sided exercises, because
Mhm.
that gait is one-sided.
It
It's
is.
not like doing a glute bridge isn't gonna help you. stabilize and prepare for that because you're not engaging that way when you're walking.
I find in general that the more single leg glute exercises I do, the better because we're typically not using both our glutes at the same time, at the same rate, even when we're riding. Like maybe a little bit, like if we're going on a straight line, but it's for such a short period of time. And at least for us specifically, especially in the Western disciplines, we usually don't have the same amount of leg pressure evenly on both sides of the horse at the same time. Like we're usually using one side, usually the outside stronger on the horse than the inside. So I really, really like to keep my glute strengthening exercises as single sided as possible. It's a pain in the butt because it takes longer, but it's essential.
And look, we all have fun when you're using both sides equally. It helps with the way things look, but it's not
Oh
the
yeah,
movement pattern.
it's not functional.
And that I think with riding, and I know we all know it's a sport, but I think we do such a good job. A good rider makes it look easy. And that's
Hmm.
all training those functional movement patterns because the amount of strength and control it takes to sit there and make it look still and comfortable is incredible.
Hmm. Okay, so for all the horsemanship riders that are listening to this, when you watch those level three riders like co host Lauren, who sadly couldn't be here today, so we miss you, Lauren, or like Kalina Weekly, Sarah Levenstock, Paige Rogers, she just won the amateur at the AQHA World Show, right? Like all those great amateurs that we've had on the show. When you watch them ride, it looks like they're not moving. But there's so much movement happening. There's so much strength going on. There's so much stabilizing going on. You just can't see it because they're so good. So that's what kind of gets like the rookie and the level one amateurs into a little bit of trouble is they try to ride as stiff looking as the level three amateurs do. But the problem is that they don't look so good because they're stiff. They look so good because they're so dynamic. And so when you watch the level one and the rookie amateurs ride around in the horsemanship and they're so stiff and they're not absorbing their horse's motion and their butt is hitting that saddle really hard, and you can just tell they're not connected to their horse because they're trying so hard to hold such a strong position. It just doesn't work. And then they're wondering why their horse's back is hollow and why they can't keep their head down and why they can't keep hind end engagement and why they can't keep rhythm and all these things. It's like, well, it's because you're kind of sitting on top of your horse all stiff and perched, and your horse does not want to lift up to you. So it's really about being as dynamic as possible and then learning how to control it.
It's yep. It's really there is so much control into it and having to teach a new rider that. I think we've all been there and that takes years to understand the concept of strength and soft. Soft elbows, soft wrists, soft hands, engaged core but not bracing, like wrapping around. Like that is years of practice.
Yeah, so the other analogy that I'll use with my clients is so anytime they're not holding a weight, I'm pretty much always having my clients go into like a horsemanship or a showmanship position. So square shoulders, square elbows. One, because that mimics riding. And then two, for posture, for all the things. But then I'll ask them to do an exercise like a single leg squat or normal squats, like some sort of an exercise. And I'll look at them and I can see that the traps are pulling the shoulders up, the biceps are bracing against their sides, and there's so much pressure on their thumbs. And I'll ask them, if I put two ducklings in your hands, would your ducklings be alive or would they be dead? And if the answer is that the ducklings are dead, that's your connection to your horse's mouth.
What's that? So much. I think this is less in the Western disciplines as much as the English disciplines, but we're trying to correct it with the strapping down their mouths,
Hmm.
the figure eights, the flashes. I don't keep a noise band on my horse at all when I ride at home
Yeah.
because I would like him to be able to say whether or not I'm ripping at his
Uh
face.
huh.
Can you just picture the bit in your mouth and how light that connection should actually be? And
Hmm.
just remembering that not only do they feel as much as us, but they feel more than we do.
So I want to break down a concept really quick. And again, aiming mostly at like horsemanship or even like some dressage riders, like when you're holding on a tight rein and you're holding direct connection to your horse's mouth. Like I said, those level three riders, if you watch them ride, they are not pulling the horse to them. They are
Yep.
pushing themselves to the horse. And there's a difference. So when you're pulling your horse to you, you are stiff through your spine, you are static through your legs, you are tight through your shoulders, and your horse is not going to want to round up and lift to you. If you set your hand and you use your glutes and your back muscles and your abs to push your body to your horse, you're going to have better posture. Your horse is going to lift up to you. You're going to have light connection to your horse. Like that's what we're looking for is like how can you set your body position and then push yourself to it? Not pull yourself to it. You got to push yourself to it. So that's again where a lot of that glute strength comes in handy. Basically, if you're listening to this, you just got to you need strong glutes.
Oh, we all need to get stronger. And I think that's so important because I think in every discipline, the most common mistake is riding from front to back and from back to front. You need to be following that horse, moving forward and through, which takes so much strength. Yeah, it takes strength to hold them back. But that's that back to the bracing, the
Mm-hmm.
tightness, then they're going to hollow through their back. They're going to avoid
Mm-hmm.
that connection versus that stability of allowing them to lift from the hind end through the back, along the neck, into that head and into the contact. It has to come from
Yep.
behind. The contact is feather light and your wrists have to be soft and your elbows have to move. And in order to do that, you have to have that core stability. You've got to have the glutes engaged and you got to be able to hold yourself in that position to be able to hold that power as it moves forward. And I really, if I can drive a point home, it's just being more considerate of our horses and thinking of them like athletes. I think about my protein intake. I
Mm-hmm.
think about my inflammation levels when I'm eating. I think about my recovery period, Epsom salt baths, magnesium, all the things I do for myself. And I do it for my horses too. But I think it's so important as riders, we treat them like the athletes they are.
Treating yourself and your horse like an athlete, I think, is very, very important to your overall success. One, for your longevity, and two, for your success in the show pen.
Yep, and longevity is huge. The coolest thing about our sport is the ages that we are able to compete through.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
We don't end when college ends. We're just getting started.
Oh, yeah.
We have to maintain it.
Thank you for listening to the Elevate Your Ride podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, share it with a friend, follow us on social media, or leave a positive review. Please note the views, ideas, and education shared on this podcast are intended for general education, and you should always consult with your team before making any big changes.